Hello, and welcome to the World Storytelling Cafe. My name is Sharon Carr, and I'm going to be sharing some of the stories that I love to tell with you. So I hope you're sitting back with a cup of coffee, cup of tea, hot chocolate, or if it's the evening, a glass of wine or two, and that you'll chill and relax to the stories that I will be telling you. I hope you've had an opportunity to hear some of the wonderful stories from some of the fabulous storytellers on World Storytelling Cafe website. It's really wonderful what John Rowe has done with his colleagues in Morocco and in Romania in setting up this World Storytelling Cafe, giving us all an opportunity to be able to share stories from around the world. Because at the moment, we're all living through uncertain times. And we all need that little uplift, something to make our moods feeling a bit lighter, better, and sometimes just to escape through story. So I hope you're sitting comfortably because I'm going to start with a story from Wales as a tribute to my late mother. She was from the Principality, from Wales, and as a child growing up in Canada, she would tell me stories of her own childhood growing up in Wales in the 1930s and the 1940s. And being a member of a big, busy, gossipy Welsh family. She inherited her talent and love for stories from her own father, my grandfather, who would gather the family around and he'd tell them stories that were spooky, funny, serious. Family stories of people who'd been dead for maybe 100 years, but through his words and through my mother's words, it gave them life. They all came back to life. So, this story is about the Bron Tryddian. It's about the little robin and how it got its red breast. And this is a tribute to my late mother. Mr. Jones, oh, whenever he heard the little grandson of his next door neighbour laughter in the back garden and the thud of that football, his heart would sink. Oh, he was a grand little chap, Mr. Jones acknowledged. Nice smile, very polite most of the times, except when he was in his nan's back garden kicking around his football. For the little boy, he would kick it this way, that way, this way, and invariably he would kick it so hard it would fly over the garden wall and land in Mr. Jones's pride and joy, his vegetable patch. His vegetable patch that he toiled over every single day, snipping a leaf here, snipping off a leaf there, hoeing the ground, planting in the little seedlings. It was his life's work, his life's passion. But when indoors and he heard the thud of that ball landing in his garden, he knew what he had to do. He would draw in his breath. He would leave where he was sitting. He'd go down the hallway, through the kitchen, out through the back door, and make his way down the path to his vegetable patch, where he saw that ball. Then he would bend down, pick it up, go over to the wall, where on the other side the little boy was there waiting to receive it. And he'd hand it over, looking grim. "Young man," he'd say, "how many times have I told you not to go kicking that ball into my garden? Doesn't matter what work I do on my vegetable patch. The plants get damaged when the ball lands on them." "But young man," he said, "you just don't listen, do you? But I tell you something now. The day will come when I will not give that ball back to you. In fact, I will keep it. It will become mine. And young man, that is not a threat. That is a promise. So be careful next time." And the little boy would look up at Mr. Jones with very wide eyes and he'd say, "Sorry, Mr. Jones, I promise it won't happen again. I promise." But the little boy, he didn't take any notice. Oh no, Mr. Jones was old. He was funny. He was too fussy. And besides, it was a little bit of fun, kicking his football around in his nan back garden, and then kicking it over the fence and seeing Mr. Jones come stomping out, cursing quietly to himself. Oh no, that was too much fun. And the little boy's nan, oh, she would shake her head. "Why," she'd say to him, "why? How many times have I told you not to go kicking your ball over into Mr. Jones's back garden? You know his vegetable patch is his pride. He loves it. Every day he's there hoeing away. But you take no notice. What goes in one ear comes out the other. Now," she said, "Mr. Jones has said that the next time you do it, he will keep your ball. And I want to tell you now that when Mr. Jones makes a promise, he does not break his word. So be warned." The boy would say, "Sorry, Nan, don't mean to do that." But he didn't really care much. Whatever grown-ups told him off, it went in one ear and out through the other. But the day of reckoning came when, one hot summer's day, Mr. Jones had planted his little seedlings out in his garden. Spinach, peas, beans that he'd been carefully nurturing over a few weeks before. Oh, when he planted them in their neat rows. Oh, he was so proud, so happy. But later that day, he heard the giggling of the little grandson next door, and his heart began to sink. But while his heart was sinking, a little bit of fire, a bit of anger started building within. Sure enough, the little boy went into his nan's back garden, treated it like his private football pitch. He imagined in his mind he was some famous footballer, and he began to kick his ball this way, that way, this way, that way, this way. Kicked it so hard, it sailed over the garden wall and landed right on top of the seedlings, flattening them all. Mr. Jones heard that thud. He became very much aware of the fate of his poor seedlings when he looked out the window. That little bit of fire in his belly, which had been stoking up, suddenly flared, and Mr. Jones took in his breath sharply and said, "Right, I will teach that young man a lesson." So he got up from where he was sitting, walked across the hallway, into the kitchen, out the back door, and walked very slowly up to his vegetable patch, where he saw that football lying on his flattened seedlings. He bent down and picked up the ball. He went over to the wall, where on the other side the little boy was there ready to receive it. But when Mr. Jones looked at him, the little boy knew that something had changed. "Right, young man," he said, "what did I tell you before? That if you weren't careful, your ball would become mine. Well, I'm a man of my word. I made you that promise, and I'm keeping it. This is now my ball." And with that, he turned around with the ball in his arms, and he walked calmly up the path towards his cottage, went through the back door, and closed it behind, leaving behind, on the other side of that wall, the little boy, at first stunned, and then outraged. "That's my ball. That's mine. It doesn't belong to Mr. Jones. This is not fair. This is not fair," as the tears began to gather round his eyes and pour down his cheeks. "It's not fair. Wait till I tell my Nan. Wait." And he went running into his Nan, who was in the kitchen, busy rolling out the pastry to make some pies for that evening meal. "Nan," he said, "Nan." "What is it?" she said, stopping what she was doing, turning around and wiping her hands on her apron. "Nan, Mr. Jones, he's got my ball. This is not fair. He's got my ball. He won't give it back to me. Can you go next door and can you get it for me, please?" His grandmother shook her head. "What did I tell you?" she said. "What did I tell you? I kept on saying, be careful when you kick your football. Don't let it sail over into the back garden of Mr. Jones's. And then when he last spoke to you, he told you to keep it. And you didn't believe him, because whatever I tell you goes through one ear and out through the other. Well, young man, as I said, Mr. Jones is a man of his word. He won't give you back that ball unless..." And the little boy heard that word, which was like a little word of hope that he wanted to clutch onto. "Unless you go next door, say you're sorry, and you promise on your heart that the next time you come to visit me, playing with your football in my back garden, you'll never ever kick it over into his. Do you understand? Now, why don't you go and say you're sorry?" The little boy was too outraged, and he didn't want to understand. "No, no, I'm not going to go, Nan. I'm not going to go and say I'm sorry. No, because I'm not. It's not fair. He's got my ball. It's not fair. Mine. It's mine." And he turned on his heel, ran out of the kitchen, through the back door, up the back path, and threw himself down on the grass. Tears rolling down his cheeks. "It's not fair. It's not fair." He picked up a stick next to him and he began to poke, jab, stab at the earth. "It's not fair. That ball belongs to me." Up, sat in the branches of a nearby tree, sat a little Brunfridian, a little robin, watching him with great interest as he jabbed and poked at the earth. Because as he did, it brought to the surface all those little insects and little grubs that he wanted to eat. The little bird flew off the branch and flashed bright red in front of the little boy's eyes, who stopped what he was doing as he watched it dart, flit, and dip in the air above his eyes. And then it landed a little way away from him, looking at him with black, beady eyes, with great expectation. The little boy's eyes met that of the bird's. Gave him an idea. He wanted a little bit of fun. So he began to fumble around in the grass next to him. And there his fingers began to stroke the smooth surface of a pebble. He dug it out from the dirt. And while still eyeing up that bird, he carefully raised his hand up to the level of his head, took aim, and threw the pebble, which sailed through the air and landed just by the feet of the little bird, who shot up into the sky, flew, looped, darted, and dipped, and flitted, and then landed a little further away from the boy. This was good fun. Who wants an old football? He thought to himself. He was ready for the little robin. He had another pebble in his hand, and he was slowly bringing it up to the level of his head, taking aim to throw it again, when from behind him he heard, "Stop what you're doing right now, young man. Drop that pebble and come here right now." It was his Nan. Her words meant business. He dropped the pebble. He rolled over onto his back. There, as he got to his feet, brushing the dirt off his trousers, he saw his Nan standing there in the path, eyes blazing, hands on hips. "Come here," she said. He did. "What have I done, Nan?" he said, looking up at her. "What have I done?" "Oh, I didn't think you could be so cruel. So cruel to that brave little bird, that little Brontryddion, that little robin. Didn't think you could do that. Do you know what those brave little birds do for you and me and all the poor sinners in hell?" The boy looked up at his Nan, big wide eyes. "No, Nan, what do they do?" "Every morning they rise before the crack of dawn, and they swoop down over the meadows and they gather the morning dew in their beaks, and then they fly down through the cracks in the earth, twisting and turning, turning and twisting, down deep, deep into the earth, until they reach the very doors of hell itself, where the devil lives and where the sinners are all there in agony, in the eternal flames of hell burning. The little birds are clever. They manage to scoot around over the tops of those flames, and then they circle where all those poor sinners are in agony, with those flames licking around their bodies and burning them, and they have such great pain. And as the sinners raise their faces to look at those little circling birds, they swoop down and drop a little bead of dew in their lips, in the parched lips of those sinners, bringing them a little bit of a relief from the agonies they suffer. But on their return journey to the earth above, the devil, who does not like any kindness at all, he stokes up the hellish fires. And as the birds fly out, the fires scorch their little breaths, turning them to bright, fiery red. That's what those brave little kind birds have done for you and me and those poor sinners. The boy looked at his Nan. "I never thought that, Nan. I'm so sorry." "I should think so. And as they're such kind-hearted little birds, I suggest, as an act of kindness, you go next door to Mr. Jones. Say you're sorry. Promise on your heart, as I've told you, that you'll never ever kick your football into his back garden again. Now, do it." And she turned around and walked up the path with purpose into the back door into her kitchen, leaving her little grandson feeling very much ashamed. "I suppose I better do it," he said. "Better go and say I'm sorry to Mr. Jones. He's a nice old man." But that little flicker of defiance in his heart. "He shouldn't have kept my ball. That ball is mine." But the little boy did as he was told. Went and said his sorry to Mr. Jones, who, being a kind-hearted man, gave him back the ball. And after that, he, the little boy, and Mr. Jones became the best of friends. And after that, the little boy treated the Brontryddion, the little red robin, with a great deal of respect. And that's a legend from Wales on how the Brontryddion, or the robin, got its red breast. And I kind of hope that I've pronounced that word properly, because my mother was a Welsh speaker, and I think she might have corrected me. But I hope you've enjoyed that story. Next one is from Aesop. It's a fable, and it's about the North Wind and the relationship he had with the sun. Because the North Wind was rather a boastful fellow, because he'd go around telling all the winds of the world that he was the strongest, the mightiest, the most powerful of all the winds. And he'd keep on repeating it, repeating it, repeating it, every time a wind was within earshot of him. Well, all the winds of the world thought the north wind was full of hot air. And it got to the stage that as he was rolling in, wanting to tell them how wonderful he was, or how mighty he was, they'd all blow themselves away to get out of his way. But the north wind needed an audience. He needed an audience as almost to convince himself that he was the mightiest, strongest, most powerful of all the winds. But nobody wanted to listen. So he had to come up with an idea that would bring him back the winds of the world, his audience. And he came across a great idea, a competition, a test. Whoever competed, well, they would be the winner. Mightiest, strongest, most powerful to win. And of course it would be him. He would be the winner. It would be centered back on him. So he called a meeting of all the winds of the world, saying he had something very important to tell them. They all came rolling in, full of expectation, wondering what was this thing he wanted to tell them. And when they all arrived, he thanked them and then told them about the competition, and that they would all be competing against each other to find out who was the strongest, the mightiest, the most powerful of all the winds. And when all the winds of the world heard that, they felt they had been brought to this meeting under false pretenses. In fact, it was the west wind who spoke to him. North wind, we came here in anticipation that there was something that you wanted to really tell us, something that was really important. But it isn't. It is back to usual that you want to find out. Well, you want to prove to us that you are the strongest of all the winds. And you want a competition to prove that? We're not interested, North Wind. Go and find someone else. And they all blew themselves away. Leaving him, well, feeling quite vexed. It was too good an idea to throw away. So he began to look around for someone or something that he could compete with. And there he saw it high in the sky. The sun, the orangey gold sun, whose smiles, light rays would stretch across the world every single day, stretch across the sky, lighting everything up. Now there had to be a reason for this competition. So he looked, and he didn't have too far to go, because there on Earth was a man down below, walking in a deep valley. Perfect. Perfect, because it would be a way of finding out who could get him to take his clothes off first. Whoever did would be the winner. So he looked up at the sun and said, "Hey, sun, I'd like to talk to you about something." And the sun swiveled round and smiled. Do you fancy doing a little bit of a test, a competition, he said, to see who would be the first to get that man walking in the deep, dark valley below, to get him to take off his clothes first. Whoever does will be the winner. What do you say to that? Well, the sun had been a bit bored of her daily routine of rising early every single day and shining her smile across the sky. She fancied a bit of a change. So she looked at the north wind and smiled yes. North Wind said, "But as it's my idea, me first, okay?" And the sun smiled yes. So he began to suck in all the air around him, using all his strength and energy, until he was quite bloated and quite full of air, icy cold air. And then he took aim and he blew gust after gust after gust of cold, chilly air, which swirled and swerved down, down, down towards the earth, and hit the man who was walking in the deep valley, dark valley, with such force that it pulled at his skin at his hair and at his clothes, and he couldn't get over how cold it was. In fact, the wind was so strong he could almost feel his feet lifting off the ground. He planted his stick deep into the earth. He reached into his bag and brought out a cap because his head was chilled, and he plunged it on his head. Oh, warm at last. And the wind died away. The man took the stick out of the earth and he carried on his way. By this time, the north wind was a little bit out of puff, and he couldn't believe that the clothes hadn't been blown off that man. In fact, he put something on his head. So he turned around to the sun above and said, "Trial run, can I do it again?" And the sun smiled yes. So with that extra reserve of strength and energy, he sucked in all the air around him until he was quite bloated with cold, chilly air. He took aim at that man on earth, and he blew gust after gust after gust of chilly, icy air. Down, down, as it swerved and swirled down, hitting that man on earth with such force it clawed at his skin, at his hair, and at his clothes. "Oh, it's freezing," he said, as he could feel his feet maybe starting to lift off the ground. Again he plunged his stick deep into the earth, and there, fumbling around in his bag next on his side, he managed to pull out a cloak. He wrapped it around his neck. It covered his shoulders. Oh, warm as the wind died away. "Ah, better now," the man said, took his stick out of the earth, and carried on his way. Well, up above, the north wind was so out of puff, out of air, that he turned to the sun and said, "Okay, sun, your turn." And the sun's eyes glittered, and she turned a slightly deeper shade of orangey gold. And that smile, those light rays began to stretch across the sky as she focused her look and her smile on that man walking in a deep, dark valley in on earth below. Well, back on earth, the man couldn't believe the sudden change in the weather. Oh, oh, this, he just, well, he had to stop. He could feel the little beads of sweat starting to develop underneath the hat on his forehead. He could feel the air had got so dry that his throat was parched. His skin on his face and hands was starting to burn a bit. And he immediately took off his cap and plunged it into his bag. Feeling cool, carried on his way. The sun's eyes glittered even more. She turned a deeper shade of orangey gold. The smiles of her light rays began to stretch across the sky as she focused her look and her smile on that man walking in the valley below. And the heat hit him like a wall. He felt he was on fire. He felt his skin on his face and top of his head, his hands almost burning red. This change in the weather. It was cold and chilly a few minutes ago, and now it's hot. It is so hot. And he stopped. He untied the cloak from around his neck. He rolled it up and he put it in his bag. Ah, cool at last. And he carried on his way. Well, this made the sun even more determined. Her eyes glowed. She turned a deeper shade of orangey gold. And the rays of her smile began to stretch right across the sky as she focused her look and smile on that man in the valley on earth. And he started staggering. Each breath he took, as the air was so dry, it hurt him. His throat was almost dried like a desert. The skin on the back of his neck, on his shoulders, on the top of his head, his hands, were on fire. He didn't care. He needed somewhere to cool off. So he tore off his shirt. He threw his bag down. He tore off his trousers. He said to himself, this climate change, it's not going to be the death of me. Oh my goodness. And he began to run. And even though he was barefoot, and even though the ground was burning and it really hurt his feet, he ran. And each breath he took, taking in that dry, parched air, it hurt him to breathe. He looked on the horizon, and there he saw it, a bright ribbon of silvery water. And he began to run even faster, until he came to the shoreline of a crystal clear lake of cooling waters. Sanctuary at last. Without any hesitation, he plunged straight in, and those waters closed over him, providing him with relief and cooling him at last. Up above, the north wind knew he was beaten, knew that he had been outsunned by the sun. So he turned around and said, "Okay, sun, well done. You're the winner." And the sun's eyes glowed, and the rays of her smile stretched right across the sky in triumph. Poor north wind. As sometimes when we reach maybe the end of our days, we might have learned a valuable lesson that might have taken us, as I've said, a whole lifetime to learn. And the next story I'm going to tell you, I heard some years ago from another storyteller called Polly Tisdall. So this is a tribute to her, because since she told me that story, or rather told the audiences, I've loved that story. It's an Italian story, and it's called The Thread of Life. Giorgio was an only child. His parents had been married for many years. They'd had children, but none had survived, except their beloved Giorgio, who they cherished, loved, and adored. He had an idyllic childhood. They gave him everything he ever wanted, except for one thing. Because in Giorgio, he had an impatience within, a restlessness, because the one thing he really wanted to be was like his older cousins, who were teenagers, because in his child's eyes, they were free. They could do what they wanted. They could stay out all hours of the night, not listen to their parents. They were having fun. But he, on the other hand, was so young, his parents told him everything he had to do. He knew when he had to be in at night. He felt trapped. So he began to wish. First thing in the morning, he wished, I want to be like my cousins. I want to be like my cousins. I want to grow up quickly. I want to be like my cousins. And I want to be free and have fun. Last thing at night, before he went to bed, he would wish the same thing. Every single hour of the day, he would wish, wish, wish. And he wished so hard that those wishes floated up, 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 caught by a breeze, and they came within the listening ears of the wish fairy. It happened one afternoon, one hot afternoon, when Giorgio had been told off by his mother, and he had stomped off into the garden, and he had sat down under a tree, and he had scowled. I wish I could be like my cousins. I wish I could be a teenager, because then I could run away from home and my parents would never ever miss me. They don't love me and I don't love them. There was a trembling in the air. Giorgio looked all around him. He could see that there was, the grass, the colour, and the colour of the flowers were shimmering, more vivid. And there he saw, coming out of the air, forming before his very eyes, were wings, a head with long flowing black hair, the shape of a woman dressed in gold and silvery shiny stuff. And her feet, they weren't touching the ground. She was hovering. Who was this appearing before him? He suddenly got very scared. But the fairy smiled at him. And in that smile there was such warmth, such compassion, that he felt his fears just trickle away. And when she spoke, her voice was melodious. Giorgio, she said, Giorgio, there's nothing to be afraid of. I am your wish fairy, and I've come to grant you your wish. I've heard you tell me so many times. I felt I wanted to give you something. He looked up at her with big eyes. Really? Yes. And she brought out in her palm of her hand a ball of thread. Giorgio, this thread is your life. Every time you pull it, the years will flash by, and you will become the age that you want to be. But before I give it to you, Giorgio, listen to me. Every time you pull the thread, you will never ever get that time back. And each time you pull the thread, it will shorten your life. So, I give you this, but be careful. And he took that ball of thread from her as she faded back into the air and was gone. Oh, ball of thread, my life. I can be like my cousins, he thought, because as a child, as we've all done when we were children, you think your life is going to go on forever. It is endless. And you have that impatience, that restlessness where you want to grow up quickly. And Giorgio did. And he yanked the thread, and the years flashed past him. And there he was, suddenly a teenager, as old as his cousins. Oh, and this was great, because he stayed out all hours of the night. He never listened to his parents. He never noticed, though, that this time they were much older. He went to parties. He stayed out all day. He had a ball. This was the life. Until he went to a family gathering. And there, before his eyes, he could see his cousins, whom he so wanted to be like. They were men. They'd left home, gone to university, were being independent, were having fun. And what rose up within him was that restlessness, that impatience to grow up quickly. So when he got home, he ran up the stairs, went straight into his bedroom, went to the desk in the corner, yanked open the drawer, and there, nestled in some candy wrappers, was the ball of thread. He scooped it up. He pulled the thread, and the years flashed past him. Now, he was the same age as his cousins. He too had left home. He was at university studying, and he was independent. He very rarely went home, but when he did, he never noticed that his parents were much older and not so well. But he was having a ball, going to the theatre, traveling, meeting young ladies. It was ace. It was great. Until he went to another family gathering, an engagement party this time, and saw that his cousins were older than him, and they had left university. They were traveling. They had their first job, and one was getting engaged. And he had that old impatience, that old restlessness rise up within him again to be like his cousins. So when he got home, he went up the stairs, went to his bedroom, went to that desk in the corner, pulled out, opened the drawer. There, nestled in some crunched up bit of paper, was that ball of thread. Picked it up, yanked it, and he did it again and again and again. And the years flashed by. He met a young woman after leaving university. He liked her, she liked him. They went traveling together. A certain understanding developed between the two. They got engaged. The day of their marriage was set. They got married, bought their first home. He had a job. They had children. Their children grew up. Their children went to school and college, studied, left home, went to university, traveled, got married, had their first job, and they had children. And so the years passed, and that ball of thread, George's life, got smaller and smaller and smaller. So, on the morning of his 80th birthday, he sat there on the edge of his bed, looking at that ball of thread. Much smaller now. In fact, Giorgio knew he did not have much longer to live. He thought back on his life, his eventful, full life, of his beloved parents, passed away many years ago, of his cousins, whom he'd always wanted to be like, whom he aspired to be like. But they were gone. He thought also of past family members and other friends who were gone. And he thought of all the things that he had achieved. A good job, a good marriage to a loving woman whom he loved very much, children whom he adored and were doing well, and their grandchildren whom he loved. He could hear them downstairs with his wife in the kitchen, giggling and laughing and planning all sorts of wonderful things to do with their grandfather on his birthday. And in that moment, he made a decision. He got up from his bed, and as he did, he could hear his grandchildren coming up the stairs, laughing, giggling, and singing, coming to wish him a happy birthday. He went over to the corner in his bedroom where their antique desk stood, that desk he had brought from his own family home. He opened the drawer. He put in the ball of thread. He closed it. Then, with the key that was resting on the surface of the table, he took it and locked the drawer. He could hear his children getting nearer to the bedroom door, so he moved around the shape of the desk, went to the bedroom window, opened it wide, raised his arm, and threw that key as far as he could throw it. He watched it as it flew over the treetops and landed on the other side. And then the door burst open. His grandchildren came tumbling in, wishing him a happy birthday. And, "Oh, grandmother, we've got so many things we want to do with you. Got so many presents," the youngest said. "I made you something. I hope you like it." And in that moment, in the embrace of his family, Giorgio, that decision that he'd made, knew it was the right one. That, in this little bit of life he had left yet to live, he would live in the moment, live in the love that he felt for his family, and they would love him back because they were a family unit. He wouldn't worry any more about the future. No, for this was what he wanted to do, his present to himself on his 80th birthday. Well, thank you very much for listening to my stories. I hope you've enjoyed them. And I've enjoyed telling them. And I wish you well. And I hope you'll continue to listen to the stories from all the fabulous storytellers on World Storytelling Cafe. And you may feel so inclined to offer myself or the other storytellers a coin or two. And at the bottom of the screen, there's a little link. But thank you, and I wish you well.
Well, you've listened to the stories. If you're not on the webpage, worldstorytellingcafe.com, go there now, because there you have the opportunity to drop a few coins into the storyteller's hat, or maybe a note or two. If you don't mind, you can write us a check if you want. We accept anything. You just click on the little hat and then you can pay us. Whatever you want. If you don't have to, if you've got no money, and a lot of us haven't, don't worry. But if you've got money, we'd really appreciate it. We love to eat. But what we really appreciate is you listening to the stories. Thank you very much for listening.